Hello and welcome back to awtoolbox.com. My name is Glenn Keller, and in this video we are diving into the world of Teamcenter administration. So we're going to be focusing on doing everything from the Active Workspace side as much as possible, but also failing over to that rich client side to give you a little bit of what is left to be pulled over to Active Workspace, as well as to cover some of the gaps. To begin with, in the last video, we went through a whole bunch about the differences between the different administrative roles in Teamcenter and Active Workspace, as well as going into what those roles truly mean with regards to the environment and why you may need to know both roles as you get into it. Now, to begin with in here, what we're going to do is now begin to break things out a little bit. And we're going to focus on the administrative role, which is the forehand role of what you need to learn. And we're going to talk about all the capabilities that we can see just kind of off the get-go. Obviously, in these little videos, we can't cover literally everything, but we will cover the main points, most commonly used applications at a very high level. Now, in the next video, we'll go into the same type of thing with the Business Modeler IDE, give you a true introduction to each of the tasks, do a little bit in each one, and then we'll do a simple deployment in that case. And then as the videos continue down the release cycle, we will get deeper and deeper with new use cases in each section of the demonstrations. So to begin with, what we're going to do here is I am in Active Workspace. Now I am currently what's called Admin 01, which in my system is an administrator in the DBA group and role. And you can see that here. So I have the workspace, which is essentially a way to switch over and provide myself different capabilities. Author is for using, searching, those types of things. Active Architect is more for the development side, and Active Admin is more on the administrative side. So we're going to stay tuned to Active Admin in this case. And then you can see the tiles that I have up. So for administrators inside of Active Workspace, the biggest ones that you're going to interact with are the People, Access Manager, Workflow Designer, Query Builder, and there's another one that isn't here, and it isn't here for a reason. We need to add it, and it's Preferences. So there's those big ones are the ones that you're going to work with all the time. Table Configurator is beginning to be a little bit more heavily used. So in the previous video, we walked through a simple use case of adding a user in the People location. The People location used to be called the organization in the rich client. So if I open up that rich client here, the organization application is sometimes down in the lower left-hand corner, but in this case, I'll have to open it. And this was the organization application that we used to work with. Now, if we go into the People location, this will help you control all those groups and roles and users very similarly now in this version to how we saw it up here. Now, there are some things that we indicated in another video that aren't there. Things like sites, external applications, volumes, calendars. Those types of elements are not manageable in the People organization versus in the rich client. So that is a little bit of a gap with regards to the installation side. However, if I select things, the style sheets in here will respond accordingly, and I can come in and I can use buttons across the tables up here to change my look and view. I can add roles, I can create new ones, and I can say this is my training role. Create add, and it will add to that group as you can see it on the left hand side. So at that point I can come in and I can see my table of users, and I can do the same thing. I could create a new user, or I could search for existing users to add them in. So I have a user called user 01, and I'm going to add this user to that group and role. So at this point, the user is active, and that user would be able to log in under and switch their organizational, who they are in the system, to that group and role here. So I can do that. I can also look at the role now with the user in it and see them in the table. I can change my views or layouts in the table so that I can see them in different ways. I can even export them out, and then under this ... you may have more tools, more columns available, but that's essentially it. Now, in here you will see groups, which are kind of the top level. They have different things like if they're DBAs or not, if they have a different default volume than the system, and what their name and security is. Security will interact with access. If I look at the roles, you'll notice that when I switch down, I get different style sheets, so they update. So now I see users in this list, and then if I go to user, I see all the users' information. The key on the personal information is going to be your email address so that notifications can get sent out. The rest of this is essentially the licenses that are applied, geography, nationality, and citizenship settings for things like license control or additional security. And then who their default group is. So when they first log in, what is the group that you want them in so they don't have to change to it if they do have more than one group. If you come in and look at this view in a different view, so you could see it in table view in this case, you would have to open each element up instead of expanding it. So if I wanted to see what's in clearance, I would hit open, and then I could see its attributes. But notice I can't see it in context to the actual tree. If I wanted to do that and I didn't want to use tree mode, I could go to list, and there's a little black arrow that I could click that will then take me to the role within the group. And then I could use the breadcrumb trail up at the top here to kind of go back and forth. So the organization app lets you remove users, set them active, inactive, add users, search for existing users, set them in different locations in here. You can also see a full list of the groups here, roles here, which are kind of the hats you wear within the group, and users here. So these users will just be the basic information. Role will just be the flat information. It won't tell you what users are in them. And groups are the same thing. You're not going to see the roles that are in them, or you will in this case because it's top level, but you'll see the roles that are in them, but notice I can't dive into that role unless I open it here, which won't be the same thing. Organization is how you actually manipulate and see it in your actual view, and you need to go into tree view. So now if you go into groups over here, notice it's still in a different view. If I notice tree isn't available. So a little bit about people. It's a good tool. It'll allow you to get deeper with it. And in future videos, we'll go create users and remove them. But that gives you the gist of that tool. Access Manager, if I jump into this one, is very similar to the Access Manager we had in the Rich client. So I keep opening the BMIDE tool, but the Rich client, if I came into Open Perspective, Other, Access Manager, it used to look like this, where we had the tree on the left side. I'd say they did a pretty good job of that. And then you have what's called ACLs on the right side, and you can see ours isn't populated at the moment, but it would have that. So the big thing here is this is a very important component. It sets all the permissions to everything in your system, and it is fairly dangerous to work in this tool. So I always recommend backups. I like to come in here and notice there's an export function. I'll use export to export this tree out and just let it download. And it wasn't exported in my system at the moment just for configuration reasons. But you can export that out. Now look for future videos where we troubleshoot things like that. In addition to that, we could come in and we could select a branch that has permissions, and you could set permissions to each one of the people in your organization when they hit an experience or a task. So in this case, if the group of the owning of the person or the owning user of that object that you're interacting with has an internal setting in the people organization, then apply these rules, and only one of these rules would ever get applied to you. So you are either the owning user, not the owning user, but in the owning group, not in the owning group, but in a group that has an external or internal setting. depending on who you are, you get those permissions. So in this case, if I'm selecting an object, it would be determined based on the attributes of that object, and I would either get denied permissions to see the data or granted permissions to work with it. Now you can edit this fully in this application, so you can actually interact if you have permissions to it, but you do need to fully understand the capabilities and where to put rules. This tree does work in a very specific order, so essentially it comes down and says read these, and then notice if this is set, every single rule has a check or an X. So what this essentially means that if this rule goes into play, then no other rule in that tree will matter, because all you're doing as each rule is applied, you're applying the new rule directly below it. So if you have a check or an X in any of those rules, and through its work down the tree, another X pops up, let's say right here, then just imagine you're looking down at each column. The only rule that you're going to see is the first rule making your way down that is applied. So in this case, the first thing I see is a check. So the X is no longer needed, or it doesn't work in that combination of rules. Now, that doesn't mean I don't need the check or the X down below. It could mean that when I'm not a sponsor, that does take place. But what it means is for the active tree or the active evaluation on an object, anytime you set permissions, you need to pay attention to the hierarchy of this tree to ensure you're not overriding permissions set higher in the tree by essential tools. Typically, people will work lower down in the tree, below the in-job and status elements. So a lot of times people will stay to this POM application working. This is a good branch to modify as it only pertains to the data you work with. But if you know a little bit more and you need to get around a use case, typically all the way up to in-job is something you could mess around with. But again, be safe, be careful, and take a look at our longer videos, either in some of the older versions or in this version. All of them are applicable. And learn a little bit more about setting these permissions in here. Now, you will hear two terms. You will hear the Active Manager Rule Tree, which is the tree over here. And you'll hear the Access Control List, which is an ACL. Some people will call them ACLs, ACLs. So these two terms will be used interchangeably in the tutorials and demos, and you just need to know that the rule tree evaluates the path or flow of application of those rules, and the ACL are which permissions are actually applied to who during that line of the rule tree. So another way to think of the ACLs are going to be sheets of paper if you're overlaying them on top of each other as it goes through, but in kind of a reverse order. Each new branch slides under the deck, not on top of the deck. So that's the Access Manager Rule Tree and a very, very rudimentary overview of that tool. The Workflow Designer application is another big tool that will be used by administrators throughout the system. This tool allows you to take what are called task templates, which are an individual task like this, that have little individual tasks that need to accomplish, and then organize them into larger processes, like the CR process, that then are submitted. You can submit an object to them, and the system will take them through task by task and allow individuals to work with them. This tool is very, very powerful as you can select a workflow. You can see and turn on things like a grid to help you align different elements inside of the tool. So if I hit apply, I can get a grid. I can apply different layouts, top to bottom, left to right. I can save layouts off, and then I can edit the tool. say offline or online, so I could edit it and make it inaccessible to people until I turn it back on, which is important if there's an error. Or I can edit it and maybe I have an update coming and I want to keep it online while I'm editing it and then update all the workflows later. In this case, I'll choose offline and the workflow will become offline. Now you'll get a new button across the top called the task palette. And if you select that button, you will then get all the different task types that you can use. Each task type in the documentation has a different purpose. Things like a do task like this, initiate workflow, could only be one individual is going to perform this task. And typically they're doing something to the data, attaching something, attaching references, releasing something. Whereas review tasks is a different type, and it actually requires a decision, approve or reject, and you could have a quorum of individuals to do that. And then this type of task, if you hit the black arrow, actually has a task that allows you to pick all the individuals that need to review and then move off to an actual review state. So each task type matters, and it's important to understand what task types can flow into other ones. There are tasks called OR tasks that help join different paths together, and you can have multiple paths on each workflow. You can also define new success and fail paths by selecting those down here. A success path you'll see is the black arrow, and a fail path is if somebody rejects something or fails something. You can see the dotted line represented by that. Down below, you have properties, things like the workflow name. You can define whether the workflow is controllable or accessible by a specific user, group, role, object type, status on the object. The sky's the limit here, but just note, these filter conditions are a component of the BMIDE. So you have to build these in that BMIDE tool that we've been talking about here. So a little bit of an overlap with that Business Modeler IDE component. Then you can also say this is the default workflow for a specific object type, but you do need to know the object types in question, which then again goes back to that BMIDE tool. If I go to access, you can also inherit access permissions for this, and you can say, hey, during the execution of the workflow, if the object's in the workflow, apply these additional security mechanisms or open up permissions to people. Handlers are little programs that we can attach to the workflow. So this right here essentially just says, hey, if there is anything related to the object that I am about to submit with an IMAN specification relationship, then please also attach that object as a target of that workflow, which means they're going to get that release status. So you can do that, and you can add different arguments here. Each handler, which there are a lot of handlers, does different things. And there are what are called rule handlers and action handlers. Rule handlers are going to check for something. Action handlers are going to do something, like submit a new workflow, create an object. Rule handlers will check to see if it's checked in before you submit to it, and so on and so forth. You can also configure notifications. These are actually just handlers that you're adding in. It's just giving you a nice UI for it. You could also add the handler here. It's called EPM Notify, and then you can build those notifications to add notifications for people. You can build a subject, a message, include details about the workflow, and then also include specific key roles of the workflow. Assignments for the task, you can say, hey, I want to assign this task to a specific individual, key roles. I could say a specific resource pool or dynamic participant. And then I could say list arrangements, so I can see the workflow in a table form. I can also set it back online or end edit if I want to keep it offline, set it back online, and then that will become available for people to submit to again. So I can manage all of my workflows right here. I can also import and export them, as there is another side of this display over to the right, and notice there's an import export. So if I need to get these from my development environment over to my training environment or my training to my prod, I can do that with this simple export import, and it should import in the new site. So a lot of different components that we can play with in workflows, a lot of things to learn as we dive deeper with them. If I go back to home, making our way straight across here, table configurations. These are, if we switch back to author, go into any place that has a table that shows up as the main page. So if I open inbox, for instance, this is a list, but if I'm able to switch to table here, and it gives me a set of columns here, you can see all these columns. If I can do that, then that page is controlled by the table configurator. Make sure that you're not thinking that the style sheet tables are them. So this table over here, though it can be controlled, is not by default controlled by those. So you have to understand a little bit about how the style sheet works. A style sheet is a development concept to change the interface. This is a style sheet. So just note, you can have your tables pick up on those table configurations, but what we're talking about is things like the tables up here. And then if I do a search for something, let's do 090 star, you can see the search results are also going to have a table option here. And so on and so forth. Every page basically has one. There are some exceptions, but the goal of it is to control these columns. It is also a goal to control the configure table option here. Notice it opens the table in the configuration. So I can come to a table and say configure table, and it's going to actually open that table specifically up in the configurator so that I can then come in and change things about those columns. And these are kind of the default settings. My users can then override them, modify them at their will, but I could add properties to them. I could say basic properties by type. So maybe if I have an item revision in my display, item revision should be in here somewhere. There we go. There's a lot of different types. But if I have an item revision, then I can say I want to include 3D snapshot into the table. And then I can see a list of those associated properties. If I do a second one, like active change, and then click off, you can see them listed. Then you just add, and it will add it. You could also do advanced on that. So in here, if I say add property again, advanced, you can see in here it's got what object type, and then you can define what's called a dynamic compound property. So if you wanted the table to traverse a relationship up or down, multiple relationships or one, and then grab information from a child object and then display that in the table, that's how you do that. So typically you could do something like ref, I want to go down the relationship IMAN specification, and out of all those attached objects, for anything that's a workspace object, I want to get the object name of that object as a column. So that's kind of how you would do that. We could also do something a little bit more. If I wanted a link, so I could do ref grm rel. So that stops at the relationship. IMAN specification, workspace object. I could even just do all data sets instead. And then I can say primary relation or secondary relation, secondary object. And then I could say add for that. Now, if it's not a good one like this, it has a little typo in it, so I've got a double A. Save it, it will tell you, and then you save it and you got it added in here, and then you could just go test it. So the table configurator is very powerful. It gives you a little bit of cross-application referencing so that you can open a table and modify it from right there. And then you could save as different table configurations to other ones. You can delete them, you can export and import them into other sites. And this is leaps and bounds above what we had to do in previous versions, so applaud Siemens for this one. And then just don't forget you do have a little edit button where you can mass update and drag values down. So we'll get deeper into column configurations and arrangements in future videos, and actually we've kind of spent the time frame we have allotted for this video. So in the next video, we're going to kind of slide another video into the deck before we get to the BMIDE side. What we're going to do here is go into Active Admin, and we've gotten through a high-level overview of these 4 objects. In the next video, we're going to take a high-level overview of these 4 objects. And then once we get done with that, we'll add in the Preferences object as well and learn a little bit about that. We thank you for joining us today in this video. Stay tuned for the next one.